Hey there, survivors. It's David here. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's get started. My name is Ethan Cole, and for 12 years I worked security inside a building most Americans will never see from the inside. Fort Knox is not dramatic the way movies imagine it. It is fluorescent lighting, reinforced corridors, biometric scanners, and men trained to treat silence as a companion rather than a threat. The gold sits behind steel and concrete so thick you stop thinking about it as wealth and start thinking about it as weight. I used to joke that I guarded something that could never move, yet somehow made everyone outside restless. My shift usually began at 0500. Marcus Hale would already be leaning against the check-in desk with a paper cup of coffee he pretended not to need. He was 5 years younger than me and far more talkative, filling the early quiet with stories about his daughter's soccer games or complaints about the cafeteria eggs. Dana Brooks, our shift supervisor, carried herself differently. She was precise, not cold, but measured in a way that suggested she never forgot where she stood in the chain of command. Together we formed a rhythm that felt stable. The first reports of violence reached us through off-duty chatter, not official channels. A private mentioned riots in Louisville. Another guard said a hospital in Nashville had locked down after multiple assaults in the emergency department. None of it sounded coordinated. Civil unrest flares up every few years for one reason or another, and Fort Knox does not react to rumors. We secure assets, maintain protocol, and wait for directives. That was the expectation. Still, something about the tone of the conversations felt off. It was not the content. It was the absence of clarity. Normally, information trickles down quickly on a military installation. Briefings are concise. Situational awareness is considered a form of discipline. That morning, the internal memo simply stated elevated security posture. No explanation, no time frame. Dana read it aloud in the locker room and then folded the paper carefully as if doing so might contain the uncertainty. Below ground, the vault corridors carry sound strangely. Footsteps echo in elongated patterns that make you hyper-aware of your own movement. The gold reserves are stacked behind reinforced doors that require layered authentication, each step deliberate and rehearsed. I had walked those corridors so many times that I no longer noticed the scent of recycled air or the faint hum of climate control units designed to preserve metal that does not corrode easily. Marcus nudged me during our first patrol. "You think this is about protests?" he asked quietly. "Probably," I said, though I did not believe it fully. Protests do not prompt restricted internal memos without context. Protests do not cause officers to avoid eye contact in the hallway. Mid-morning, we passed a communications technician who looked pale beneath the overhead lights. He was carrying a tablet and walking faster than regulations usually permit. When Marcus greeted him, he did not respond. Dana noticed too, but said nothing until we rounded the next corner. "Stay sharp," she said. "Something's not being said." That was the first time I felt it. Not fear exactly, but a shift in atmosphere. Fort Knox is designed to feel permanent. The walls are engineered to withstand external force. The vault door alone weighs more than most houses. Yet, permanence depends on the people inside behaving predictably. When predictability falters, concrete loses some of its reassurance. Just before lunch, the base-wide intercom activated unexpectedly. There was no preamble, only a clipped directive instructing all non-essential personnel to remain in assigned sectors until further notice. No reason was given. The message ended as abruptly as it began, leaving behind a silence thicker than before. Marcus looked at me, eyebrows raised. "That's new." Dana checked her radio and received nothing beyond static. "We hold position," she said, though her voice lacked its usual steadiness. Deep beneath layers of reinforced steel and stored bullion, the vault had never felt alive. That morning it felt like something had begun moving within it, unseen but impossible to ignore. The full lockdown alarm did not sound like a siren. It was a sequence of low mechanical tones that vibrated through the corridor walls, subtle but unmistakable to anyone trained inside them. Red indicator lights flashed above reinforced doors, and magnetic seals engaged with a deep, resonant click that travelled through the floor beneath our boots. Marcus stopped mid-step and looked toward Dana, waiting for confirmation that this was routine. "It isn't," she said quietly. Overhead speakers crackled, but instead of a structured announcement, we received fragmented instructions. All lower-level security personnel were to remain in assigned zones. Access between sectors required supervisory clearance. External communication was temporarily suspended. The wording was precise but evasive, as though drafted in haste by someone unwilling to explain the cause. Marcus reached for his phone, despite knowing personal signals rarely penetrated this deep underground. "You think this is terrorism?" he asked. "If it were," Dana replied, "we'd be briefed." The corridor ahead of us led toward a secondary processing chamber, normally used for scheduled inspections and controlled access drills. That morning it was occupied by 2 armed soldiers escorting a third between them. The third soldier's uniform was torn at the shoulder, fabric darkened by what looked like dried blood. His boots dragged slightly, not because he lacked strength, but because his coordination seemed off. "Quarantine protocol," one of the escorts said when he noticed us observing. His tone carried strain beneath formality. The wounded soldier lifted his head slowly. His skin had taken on a pale, almost greyish cast beneath the fluorescent lights. His eyes were unfocused, drifting past us as if tracking something that did not exist in the corridor. A medic trailed behind them, clutching a portable case and issuing instructions about isolation rooms. As they passed, the injured man's breathing shifted. It deepened abruptly, turning ragged. He began muttering something incoherent, the words slurring together into sound without meaning. The escort tightened his grip on the man's arm, but the motion triggered a reaction neither of us anticipated. The wounded soldier snapped sideways with startling speed, sinking his teeth into the wrist of the escort restraining him. The scream that followed ricocheted violently along the concrete walls. The second escort attempted to intervene, striking the infected man across the face with the butt of his rifle. It did not deter him. He tore flesh with mechanical persistence, jaw clamped so hard that bone cracked audibly. Dana moved first, drawing her sidearm and shouting commands that dissolved under chaos. Marcus froze for a fraction of a second, disbelief overtaking training. I stepped backward instinctively, heart pounding as the medic stumbled away, knocking over the metal case. The bitten escort fell to one knee, clutching his wrist. Blood pooled rapidly beneath him. The infected soldier released his grip only to lunge again, this time toward the medic. Dana fired a single controlled shot into the attacker's torso. The impact staggered him but did not halt his movement. He advanced regardless, mouth open, eyes fixed with unnatural focus. "Head!" Marcus shouted, snapping back into clarity. Dana adjusted her aim and fired again. The second shot struck the soldier high above the cheekbone. This time he collapsed abruptly, limbs folding beneath him as if a switch had been flipped. The corridor filled with the metallic scent of blood and cordite. For several seconds no one spoke. The bitten escort stared at his own injury as though trying to reconcile what had just occurred. His breathing was shallow, uneven. The medic scrambled to apply pressure, hands shaking visibly. "This isn't civil unrest," Marcus whispered. Dana lowered her weapon slowly. "Seal this sector," she ordered into her radio, though static answered her first attempt. On the second transmission, a voice responded with clipped acknowledgement and nothing more. The bitten soldier's pupils began to dilate unnaturally fast. His trembling intensified, fingers curling inward as if guided by unseen tension. I watched the change with a cold clarity that stripped away denial. Whatever had breached the base was not contained to rumor or perimeter. Fort Knox had locked itself down, but the threat was already inside. The order came down within minutes. All lower-level vault personnel were to descend to reinforced containment sectors until further notice. No explanation accompanied it, only the clipped authority of command, attempting to preserve structure while structure was visibly fracturing. Dana motioned for us to move, and we followed without argument. Training fills the space where fear would otherwise settle. The descent into the deeper vault corridors always carried a psychological shift. Elevators groaned as they lowered through layers of concrete and steel, each level more insulated than the last. Normally, that insulation felt protective. That morning, it felt isolating. Above us, infection was spreading among trained soldiers. Below us sat the nation's gold reserves, stacked in orderly permanence, immune to panic. Marcus stood rigid beside me as the elevator doors opened onto the lower vault level. "If this spreads," he muttered, "they'll seal us in." Dana did not deny it. "Our responsibility is internal stability," she said, voice steady but tight. "We hold this level." The corridor lights flickered once before stabilizing. Reinforced doors lined both sides, each requiring layered authentication. I scanned my badge automatically, aware of the weight of the irony. We guarded billions in bullion while personnel upstairs bled on concrete floors. A distant gunshot echoed faintly through the ventilation shafts. The sound traveled oddly through the structure, distorted by angles and material density. It was followed by another, then a muffled shout. Marcus swallowed audibly. "Containment teams are active," Dana said, though the reassurance lacked conviction. We reached the primary vault chamber, a cavernous space dominated by stacked gold bars arranged in regimented rows behind secondary steel grating. The air was cool and dry, regulated to preserve metal that required no preservation. I had spent years walking this chamber without thinking about symbolism. That morning, the gold looked different. It no longer represented economic stability. It resembled something inert and useless against what was unfolding. Marcus exhaled slowly. "All this," he said, gesturing toward the reserves, "and it doesn't buy one working answer." Before Dana could respond, a heavy impact reverberated against the secondary corridor door behind us. The sound was not mechanical. It carried the blunt force of human weight. We turned simultaneously. Another impact followed, closer, accompanied by a low, uneven exhale that scraped along the steel surface. "Someone made it down," Marcus said, voice barely controlled. Dana drew her weapon and moved toward the security console. "Door integrity?" she asked. "Level 2 barrier holding," I replied, scanning the display. The reinforced door separating the lower vault from upper corridors was designed to withstand external assault. It had not been engineered with infected personnel in mind. Another impact struck the door, harder this time. A smear appeared along the small observation viewport, a streak of blood dragged downward by unsteady hands. Through the thick glass, I caught a glimpse of a uniform sleeve torn at the shoulder. The figure outside staggered back, then lunged forward again. His forehead struck the glass with enough force to leave a faint crack along its surface, though the integrity held. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, teeth snapping against air. Marcus raised his rifle but did not fire. "He's not even trying to talk," he said. "He can't," Dana replied. The infected soldier continued battering the door with relentless rhythm, each impact slightly misaligned, yet forceful enough to test structural limits. Blood pooled at his feet, spreading slowly across the corridor floor beyond the barrier. Gunfire erupted again somewhere above us, followed by an automated announcement instructing all personnel to remain in secure positions. The tone of the voice sounded strained, as if the person delivering it knew the command was increasingly theoretical. The soldier outside paused abruptly, head tilting in unnatural alignment. For a second, the corridor fell quiet. Then his gaze shifted downward toward the base of the door, as if evaluating its seams. "He's adapting," Marcus whispered. The gold behind us gleamed under sterile lighting, untouched and indifferent. Billions in stored wealth sat within arm's reach, incapable of halting a single infected body from pressing against reinforced steel. Dana keyed the internal reinforcement protocol, activating additional magnetic locks. "We are not letting this level breach," she said, more to herself than to us. The infected soldier resumed striking the barrier, but slower now, more deliberate. Each impact echoed through the vault chamber, vibrating faintly along the floor beneath stacked bullion. Concrete and gold had always symbolized permanence to me. That morning they felt like layers of denial stacked over something moving steadily closer. The soldier outside the secondary corridor door did not tire. He struck the reinforced barrier with a persistence that ignored pain, each impact leaving faint streaks of blood across the observation window. The magnetic locks hummed steadily, reinforced by Dana's override, yet the repeated force began to produce subtle distortions along the frame. I had trusted those doors for years. Watching one tested by something that no longer cared about self-preservation unsettled that trust. Marcus stepped closer, rifle raised, but not yet firing. "If the glass gives, we won't have room to maneuver," he said. His voice was steady, though I saw tension along his jaw. Dana checked the console again. "Structural integrity remains above threshold," she replied, though the percentage indicator had dipped slightly since activation. But this was designed for coordinated assault. Not this. The infected soldier paused once more, head angled as if listening. His breathing rasped audibly through the thick barrier. Then he shifted sideways and began striking the lower seam instead of the center. The change was subtle but intentional. He slammed his shoulder repeatedly against the edge where steel met concrete, testing for weakness. "He's not random," Marcus muttered. A sharp metallic snap echoed above us, another gunshot closer than before. The ventilation carried fragments of shouting down into our chamber. The infection was not being contained efficiently. The soldier outside stumbled briefly, as though momentarily losing coordination. I thought for a second he might collapse. Instead, he regained balance and pressed his face against the window, smearing blood across the glass. His eyes fixed directly on us. They held no recognition, yet they tracked movement with chilling accuracy. Dana made a decision. "If the seal drops below 90%, we engage before breach." Marcus nodded. I adjusted my stance instinctively, aware of the confined geometry of the corridor. Firing within such narrow space meant ricochet risk. Concrete and steel do not absorb rounds kindly. The integrity reading dipped again. With a violent crack, the observation window fractured at one corner. It did not shatter, but the spidering lines weakened the panel's clarity. The infected soldier responded instantly, driving his elbow into the compromised section with renewed force. The glass held, but only barely. "Now," Dana ordered. Marcus fired first, a controlled shot aimed through the reinforced pane at the soldier's upper torso. The round struck with dull impact, staggering him backward but failing to halt his movement. He lunged again, slamming both hands against the weakened glass. I took aim carefully and fired higher. The bullet pierced through the fractured corner of the window, striking just above the bridge of his nose. The effect was immediate. His body jerked once, then collapsed heavily against the door before sliding downward into stillness. Silence flooded the corridor. For several seconds, none of us moved. The magnetic locks continued their steady hum. The fractured glass remained intact, though compromised. Blood pooled along the base of the barrier, seeping beneath the lower seam, but not breaching it. Marcus exhaled slowly. "That was one," he said. Dana lowered her weapon but did not holster it. One means others, she replied. She keyed a request for maintenance to reinforce the damaged section, but the radio returned only intermittent static. Upper-level chaos was spreading faster than coordination could keep pace. I stepped closer to the door, studying the fallen body beyond it. The soldier's uniform insignia marked him as part of internal logistics. Someone who had likely been performing routine duties an hour earlier. Fort Knox had always felt insulated from unpredictability. Seeing a uniformed body lying motionless against reinforced steel forced a recalibration. "We treat every corridor as compromised," Dana said quietly. "Asset protection is secondary. Personnel survival is priority." It was the first time I had heard that hierarchy reversed aloud. Behind us, the vault chamber remained unchanged. Rows of gold bars reflecting sterile light, as though nothing had occurred. Yet the fracture in the glass told a different story. Fort Knox was not impenetrable. It had relied on disciplined humans maintaining order. Once those humans turned, steel became only a delay. Marcus glanced towards the elevator shaft leading upward. If they breach higher levels, pressure will come down. He was right. Containment in a structure like this works vertically as much as horizontally. If panic spread above, lower vault sectors would become a final refuge rather than a secured asset chamber. Dana re-engaged the reinforced lock cycle, sealing the fractured panel with secondary shielding. The hum deepened, layered with additional mechanical resonance. It sounded stable, but stability had become conditional. The first breach attempt had failed. That did not mean the next one would. The power faltered without warning. It began as a faint flicker along the corridor lights, a subtle dimming that might have passed unnoticed on any other day. Then the fluorescent panels overhead pulsed twice in rapid succession before plunging half the vault level into darkness. Emergency strips along the floor activated, casting long red shadows across concrete walls and stacked bullion. Marcus swore under his breath. Backup grid should have compensated. Dana moved immediately toward the main control console, fingers working quickly across the interface. "Primary feed interrupted," she said, switching to auxiliary generators. The hum of the magnetic locks shifted in pitch as secondary systems engaged. For a moment, the power stabilized. Then a heavy mechanical thud echoed from somewhere deeper within the structure, followed by a metallic grind that reverberated through the floor. "That wasn't electrical," I said. Dinah's eyes flicked to the surveillance feed display. Half the monitors showed static. The remaining screens flickered between distorted hallway views and frozen images. "We've lost visual on upper sectors," she muttered. Another jolt ran through the corridor. One of the reinforced doors halfway down the passage locked mid-cycle, stuck partially open with its steel frame jammed against concrete. Red warning lights blinked along its edges, indicating incomplete seal. Marcus raised his rifle instinctively. "That door connects to personnel storage." Before Dana could respond, the emergency lighting dimmed again. This time, the auxiliary generator did not engage immediately. The corridor fell into near-total darkness, broken only by faint red floor strips and the green glow of exit indicators. In the absence of full lighting, sound intensified. Somewhere beyond the jammed door, something scraped along concrete. The noise was uneven, punctuated by a dragging rhythm that suggested unsteady movement. "Manual override," Dana ordered. I moved towards the door panel, hands steady despite the tightening in my chest. The control interface required dual authentication. Marcus stepped beside me, pressing his badge to the sensor while I keyed in the override code. The system hesitated, then responded with a sluggish mechanical grind. The door shifted a fraction of an inch before stopping again. "Obstruction detected," the panel displayed. Marcus leaned forward, trying to see through the narrow gap. The darkness beyond was thick, swallowing light. Then a shape moved within it. The scraping sound grew louder. Dana flicked on her tactical flashlight, its beam cutting through dust particles suspended in the stale air. The light revealed a uniformed body half-pinned beneath the misaligned door. The soldier's lower torso was trapped by steel, legs twisted at an unnatural angle. His upper body writhed, arms clawing at the concrete floor. His head snapped upward at the beam of light. Blood had dried in jagged streaks across his chin and collar. His jaw worked open and shut, teeth clicking audibly. The obstruction preventing the door from sealing was his own trapped frame. "He's keeping it from closing," Marcus said. "And from opening fully," Dana replied. The soldier dragged himself forward despite the crushing weight across his hips. The movement was slow but relentless. His fingers hooked into the narrow opening, pulling with mechanical determination. "Kill the lights," Dana ordered. I switched off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the scene instantly. The scraping continued, guided not by sight but by some other instinct. The soldier forced one arm through the gap, fingers reaching blindly toward the corridor. Marcus fired a single controlled shot through the opening, the muzzle flash illuminating the confined space in violent white. The bullet struck the trapped soldier high in the skull. His body jerked once, then slackened. The scraping ceased. Silence returned, heavy and incomplete. Dana exhaled slowly. This isn't a random outage. The auxiliary generator finally engaged again, restoring partial lighting. The door remained jammed against the dead soldier's torso. Beyond him, the corridor was littered with overturned equipment and dark stains marking where others had fallen. Marcus looked at the static-ridden monitors. "You think someone cut the primary feed?" Dana nodded once. "The timing's too precise." The infection was spreading, the lights were failing, and now sabotage entered the equation. Fort Knox had been engineered to withstand external assault, but it was not built for internal collapse combined with deliberate interference. As the emergency systems hummed uncertainly back to life, I understood something fundamental had shifted. We were no longer defending a vault. We were surviving inside a malfunctioning machine. Marcus volunteered to check the adjoining corridor once the power stabilized, insisting the obstruction needed clearing before pressure built along the lower levels. Dana hesitated but eventually agreed, assigning him a short-range radio and reminding him to maintain constant contact. I watched him step through the partially reopened door, boots crunching lightly over debris as he disappeared into the dim passage beyond. For several minutes, his voice filtered through the radio with steady updates. "2 down in storage sector," he reported. "1 non-responsive. Another neutralized by upper personnel before power failure." His tone was calm, almost clinical. It reassured me more than I expected. Then the transmission shifted. "I've got blood trails leading toward maintenance access," he said. "Looks recent." Dana instructed him to hold position until we could regroup, but he replied that visibility was manageable and the corridor appeared clear. His footsteps echoed faintly through the radio feed, each one growing softer as he moved farther from our level. The connection crackled. "Marcus?" I prompted. No response. Dana adjusted the radio frequency, attempting to strengthen the signal. "Hale, report." Static answered us. Without speaking, Dana reached for her weapon and gestured for me to follow. We moved through the damaged corridor cautiously, stepping over the body that had jammed the door earlier. The air smelled metallic, thick with the residue of violence and overheated circuitry. We found the first sign of struggle near the maintenance junction. A flashlight lay shattered against the wall, its lens fractured. Blood marked the concrete in uneven arcs, as if someone had tried to regain balance while losing it. "Marcus?" I called quietly, unwilling to raise my voice in a confined space where sound carried unpredictably. A faint groan answered from deeper within the passage. We followed it into a narrow maintenance alcove rarely used outside of inspection cycles. Marcus was seated against the wall, back pressed into cold concrete, rifle resting loosely across his lap. His face was pale beneath the harsh emergency lighting. "You took your time," he said weakly, attempting a smile that did not reach his eyes. Relief surged briefly before I noticed the tear in his sleeve. Blood seeped through fabric near his forearm, darker than the surrounding stains. His hand trembled slightly, fingers tightening involuntarily around the rifle stock. "Tell me that's not what I think," Dana said. Marcus looked down at the wound, as if seeing it for the first time. "Maintenance door," he explained unevenly. "Thought it was clear. One of them was pinned behind shelving. It grabbed me before I could react." I crouched beside him, examining the bite. The skin was broken cleanly, teeth marks unmistakable. There was no ambiguity left. Infection had proven consistent in its transmission. "We can isolate him," I said reflexively, though I already knew isolation only delayed what followed. Dana's jaw tightened. "Protocol is termination upon confirmed bite." Marcus let out a strained laugh. Protocol never imagined this. His breathing deepened abruptly, chest rising and falling faster than before. Sweat beaded along his forehead despite the cool air circulating through the lower levels. "I don't feel right," he admitted quietly. "It's moving fast." The radio at Dana's shoulder crackled again with fragmented report of breaches on upper floors. We were losing time in more ways than one. Marcus reached for my arm, grip firm despite the tremor in his fingers. "Don't leave me down here," he said. There was no accusation in his tone, only fear stripped of bravado. Dana met my gaze. The unspoken decision hung between us. The vault corridor felt narrower than before, walls closing inward around an impossible choice. Marcus's pupils were already beginning to widen unnaturally, his focus slipping in brief intervals before snapping back. "We have minutes," Dana said quietly. I nodded once, though my throat felt tight. Training provided clarity in theory. In practice, loyalty complicated everything. Marcus leaned his head back against the wall, breathing unevenly as the first visible tremor ran through his frame. The outbreak had reached us completely now. Not as rumor, not as distant gunfire, but as a friend sitting against cold concrete, waiting for something irreversible to take hold. Marcus's breathing changed first. It grew heavier, each inhale pulling air as if the corridor itself were thinning. I stayed crouched beside him, one hand braced against the concrete wall, watching the tremor spread from his bitten arm into his shoulders. Dana stood a few steps back, weapon lowered but ready, giving us space that felt both respectful and necessary. The emergency lights cast long shadows along the maintenance alcove, painting his face in uneven red. "I always thought it would be loud," Marcus said, forcing a strained half-smile. "End of the world, I mean. Sirens. Explosions. Not this. It's loud upstairs," Dana replied quietly. Marcus shook his head weakly. "Not like this. This is personal." His eyes flicked toward me, clarity still present but fading at the edges. "You remember when I said I hated the cafeteria eggs?" he asked. I nodded automatically, unsure why that mattered now. "My daughter calls them punishment food," he continued. "She's 8, thinks everything is dramatic." His fingers tightened against the rifle stock. "Don't let her grow up thinking I ran." The tremor in his arm intensified, muscles contracting involuntarily. I could see the change accelerating, the dilation in his pupils spreading until the brown nearly vanished. Sweat soaked through his collar despite the climate control humming steadily overhead. Dana stepped forward slightly. "We can restrain him," she said, though her tone carried the knowledge that restraint only delayed inevitability. Marcus's breathing hit sharply. His jaw clenched and released in uneven rhythm, as if testing motion he no longer fully controlled. "Don't put me in a room," he said. "Don't let me be one of them pounding on a door." The weight of the choice settled in my chest. Protocol offered clarity without comfort. A confirmed bite required immediate termination to prevent spread. That rule had felt clinical when applied to strangers in other corridors. It felt cruel now. I raised my sidearm but did not aim yet. My hands felt steady, though my pulse thudded in my ears. Marcus noticed the motion and nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Do it before I stop knowing you," he said. Dana turned her face slightly away, not out of avoidance, but to grant us privacy in the smallest way possible within a concrete alcove. The radio at her shoulder crackled with distant reports of further breaches, voices overlapping in strained coordination. Marcus's body jerked suddenly, a violent contraction pulling his spine forward. A low sound escaped his throat, not quite a growl but no longer human speech. His eyes locked onto my forearm, tracking movement with sharpened intensity. I did not wait for the lunge. The shot echoed brutally within the narrow corridor, a concussive burst that vibrated along steel and concrete. Marcus's body collapsed instantly, momentum carrying him sideways before settling against the wall. The tremor ceased. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady hum of emergency lighting. I lowered the weapon slowly, aware that something inside me had shifted irrevocably. Training had guided the action, but training could not dull its impact. Marcus had been more than a colleague. He had been the voice filling early shifts with trivial complaints and quiet humor. Dana placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. "We move," she said, her voice controlled but softer than before. We secured Marcus's rifle and stepped back into the corridor, leaving him in the alcove where he had asked not to become something else. The vault below still held its silent weight of gold. The outbreak above continued spreading through reinforced halls. No manual had prepared us for choosing between loyalty and containment. We walked back toward the main chamber with one less member in our formation, the structure of Fort Knox intact around us, but altered in meaning. Steel and concrete could delay collapse, but they could not prevent the decisions that came when infection reached someone you knew by name. We returned to the primary vault chamber without speaking. The corridor seemed longer than before, each step echoing in the hollow way only reinforced concrete can manage. Marcus's absence altered the rhythm of our movement. There had always been 3 sets of footsteps on patrol, 3 voices filling the sterile air. Now there were 2, and the silence between us felt structural rather than emotional. Dana moved straight to the communications console the moment we reached the control station. She cycled through internal channels, issuing concise requests for status updates from upper command. Static answered first, then a burst of overlapping transmissions too fragmented to interpret. A voice attempted to establish order, repeating instructions to hold sectors and await reinforcement, but the tone lacked authority. It sounded like someone reciting procedure in a building no longer listening. "Try external," I suggested. She did, switching to long-range frequencies designated for coordination with Central Command outside the base perimeter. The signal bar flickered weakly before disappearing entirely. No acknowledgement came through. No verification of containment. No instruction beyond the broken remnants looping across internal channels. Dana leaned back slightly, absorbing what the silence implied. "Either they've sealed us off," she said carefully, "or they're dealing with something worse than we are." I studied the surveillance monitors, half of which still displayed static. On one remaining feed, a hallway near the administrative wing showed overturned desks and scattered papers. A uniformed body lay partially visible in the corner of the frame, unmoving. In another feed, I caught a glimpse of 2 soldiers dragging a barricade across a stairwell entrance before the screen froze permanently. Fort Knox had always operated on layered hierarchy. Orders flowed downward, accountability flowed upward. With communications severed, that structure collapsed into isolated pockets of decision-making. The vault chamber, once an extension of national continuity, now felt like an island disconnected from governance. Dana picked up her radio again and called for any surviving supervisory officers to respond. A few voices returned, scattered and breathless. One reported infected breaching the motor pool. Another claimed the medical wing had been abandoned. No one mentioned coordinated defense. "Where's Colonel Hargrove?" Dana asked. No answer. Marcus had joked once that the gold bars behind us could outlast any administration. Standing in front of them now, I understood the absurdity. The wealth stored here represented stability on paper, yet paper meant nothing in a corridor where infection turned trained personnel into threats within minutes. A sudden metallic clang reverberated faintly through the ventilation shafts, followed by distant gunfire. The shots were fewer now, spaced farther apart. Ammunition was finite, panic was not. Dana shut down the external channel and faced me directly. "We operate independently from this point forward," she said. "Asset preservation is no longer primary. Survival is—" The words felt like treason spoken inside the most secure vault in the country, yet they carried undeniable logic. Protecting bullion held no relevance if no structured nation remained to value it. I walked along the perimeter of the gold stacks, running my hand briefly along the cool metal surface of one bar. It was dense, unyielding, indifferent. Generations had treated it as assurance against uncertainty. Now it sat untouched while uniformed soldiers fought in hallways above. A final transmission crackled through the radio, barely audible. "Command post compromised," a strained voice said. "Repeat, command." The signal dissolved mid-sentence. Dana lowered the device slowly. There would be no rescue directive, no reinforcement convoy, no coordinated evacuation order. Fort Knox had not been breached by an external army. It had been hollowed from within by infection and fear. The gold remained sealed behind steel. The command structure that justified its protection was gone. And for the first time since I began working beneath layers of reinforced concrete, I realized we were no longer guarding a symbol of permanence. We were standing inside a structure that had already lost its authority. The decision to move upward was not made lightly. The lower vault levels offered reinforced barriers and controlled access points, but they also limited visibility. With commands silent and internal reports fragmenting, remaining below ground felt less like safety and more like confinement. Dana secured the vault sector behind us before we approached the elevator shaft leading towards the surface. The ascent was slow, the mechanical groan of cables echoing within the enclosed chamber. I watched the floor indicator lights climb steadily, aware that each passing level brought us closer to whatever had overwhelmed trained personnel above. Neither of us spoke. The hum of the lift filled the space where conversation might have broken concentration. When the doors opened, the difference in atmosphere was immediate. The upper corridor lights were partially functional, casting uneven illumination across walls scarred by bullet impacts. Spent casings littered the floor. The air carried the acrid scent of discharged firearms layered over something metallic and faintly sweet. We advanced cautiously, weapons raised. The first body we encountered lay near the administrative wing entrance. The uniform was intact, but the throat had been torn open with unmistakable violence. No movement followed our approach. I forced myself not to linger. Outside access required passing through 2 reinforced checkpoints. The first had been abandoned mid-defensive setup, folding barricades half-assembled across the hallway. The second checkpoint door hung partially open, its locking mechanism damaged by repeated force from one side. Perimeter fell inward, Dana observed quietly. We stepped through into the open air. The Kentucky morning felt almost surreal in its normalcy. Sunlight filtered across the compound grounds, illuminating rows of fencing and guard towers that had once represented disciplined security. Now several sections of perimeter barrier sagged, where vehicles had collided during attempted exits. A military transport truck sat angled against the main gate, doors open and unattended. Movement caught my eye near the motor pool. 3 infected soldiers staggered between parked vehicles, their uniforms marking them as part of the same institution that had trained them to defend this ground. One dragged a torn boot behind him, leaving a streak across the asphalt. No organized defensive line remained. The outer watchtower closest to us was empty, rifle abandoned across the railing. Beyond the fence line, a narrow stretch of highway showed abandoned civilian cars scattered haphazardly, some doors left ajar. A helicopter rested on the tarmac, its rotor blades still. The cockpit glass had been shattered from inside, shards glittering beneath sunlight. Whatever evacuation attempt had been initiated had not completed successfully. Dana scanned the horizon through binoculars. No incoming support, she confirmed. The silence between gunshots was more telling than the shots themselves. Sporadic firing erupted from somewhere near the western fence, but it lacked coordination. Each report sounded isolated, disconnected from broader strategy. One of the infected near the motor pool turned suddenly toward us, alerted perhaps by our movement. It began advancing with uneven but determined steps. I steadied my aim and fired once, dropping it before it closed half the distance. The sound echoed across open ground, drawing the attention of another figure several yards away. "We can't hold this," Dana said. She was right. The compound had relied on layered defense, on personnel functioning as units rather than scattered individuals. Infection had dissolved that structure rapidly. The outer perimeter, once a symbol of impenetrability, now resembled an abandoned checkpoint in a collapsing city. I looked back towards the reinforced vault entrance beneath us, knowing that beneath layers of concrete lay gold, untouched by the chaos above. The contrast felt almost mocking. Wealth secured beyond measure while trained defenders fell in sunlight. "We either attempt extraction or we seal and isolate," Dana said. Extraction meant abandoning Fort Knox entirely. Isolation meant trapping ourselves underground indefinitely without assurance of sustainability. A distant civilian vehicle sped past the far end of the highway, swerving erratically before disappearing behind trees. Infection had spread beyond military boundaries. Surface reality left no room for illusion. The base was compromised. The perimeter was fractured. Command had fallen silent. And the vault beneath our feet no longer guaranteed safety simply because it was fortified. We had just begun retreating toward the interior access point when a voice called out sharply from behind a sandbagged barrier near the administrative wing. "Hold your position." The command carried authority sharpened by habit rather than current control. I recognized the insignia before I fully saw the man, Colonel Hargrove, base commander, uniform disheveled but posture rigid. He stepped out from partial cover, flanked by 2 remaining soldiers who looked exhausted but alert. His sidearm was drawn, though not aimed at us. "Report," he demanded. Dana delivered a concise summary. Lower vault secure for now. Multiple breaches above ground. Communications severed. Perimeter compromised. Hargrove listened without interruption, jaw set, eyes scanning the compound between sentences. "The vault remains priority 1, he said once she finished. "All remaining personnel will consolidate below and secure the asset." I felt a surge of disbelief before I could temper it. "Sir, infection has spread across multiple sectors. Holding bullion doesn't stabilize the situation." His gaze locked onto mine. "That bullion represents national continuity. If external forces interpret instability here, the consequences extend beyond this outbreak." "With respect," Dana interjected carefully, "continuity requires living personnel." Gunfire cracked again somewhere behind us, closer this time. One of the flanking soldiers flinched visibly. Hargrove did not. "The outbreak will be contained," he insisted. "We have contingency protocols." "Contingency assumes chain of command remains intact," I replied before I could stop myself. "We've lost contact with Central Command." A muscle tightened along his jaw. "Then we become Central Command." The statement might have sounded resolute under different circumstances. Standing amid fractured fencing and abandoned vehicles, it felt detached from visible reality. Another infected soldier staggered into view near the eastern tower. Blood streaked across his face. One of Hargrove's men fired 2 controlled shots, dropping him quickly. The echo lingered across open ground. "We cannot evacuate," Hargrove continued. "If this vault falls, the symbolism alone destabilizes global markets." I glanced at the shattered helicopter and the deserted highway beyond the perimeter. Markets were already irrelevant in corridors filled with infected personnel. "Sir," Dana said, voice steady but firm, "if we seal below without sustainable supply lines, we become entombed." Hargrove's expression hardened. Duty does not shift because circumstances become inconvenient. The word inconvenient hung heavily between us. A sudden scream erupted from the direction of the western fence, followed by rapid gunfire and then silence. One of the flanking soldiers turned instinctively toward the sound. Hargrove remained facing us, unwavering. I realized then that he was clinging to structure as defense against chaos. If the vault remained secure, then order had not entirely collapsed. If gold stayed locked behind reinforced doors, then the nation still possessed something immutable. But immutability did not neutralize infection. "Sir," I said carefully, "we can reinforce the lower sectors temporarily, but remaining indefinitely assumes no further breaches. That's a risk calculation." He studied me for a long second, weighing insubordination against logic. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted behind him. 2 figures rushed from behind a transport truck, uniforms marking them as base personnel. Their movements were wrong, too erratic, too direct. The flanking soldier fired once, then twice, but one infected reached him before the second shot could land accurately. The struggle was immediate and brutal. Hargrove turned sharply, firing at close range, neutralizing the attacker with a precise headshot. The second infected lunged toward us. I fired first, this time dropping it mid-stride. The body collapsed heavily onto asphalt. Silence returned in fractured intervals. Hargrove looked at the fallen soldier he had failed to save. His authority remained intact in posture, but something behind his eyes shifted. "Secure below," he said finally, though the certainty in his tone had thinned. "We hold as long as we can." Orders still existed. Whether they mattered anymore was another question entirely. We retreated towards the interior access corridor under covering fire, the compound behind us dissolving into scattered engagements that lacked coordination. Colonel Hargrove and his remaining soldier fell in behind us without further argument. The infected were no longer isolated pockets. They were appearing unpredictably between vehicles, along fencing, emerging from blind spots we had once considered secure. The reinforced door leading back into the sub-level access chamber sealed behind us with a heavy, metallic thud. For a brief moment, the sound felt protective. Then the pounding began almost immediately from the exterior side, fists and bodies striking steel with reckless persistence. "Lower levels," Dana said sharply. We descended the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator, unwilling to risk mechanical delay. The echo of our boots mixed with the distant reverberation of impacts above. Somewhere in the compound, an alarm tone began cycling intermittently, its rhythm broken and uneven. Halfway down, one of Hargrove's soldiers stumbled. Blood seeped through the fabric at his calf where a bite mark showed clearly beneath torn material. He had not mentioned it outside. "I'm fine," he insisted when Dana noticed. He was not. His breathing quickened. and his pupils began widening in the same pattern I had witnessed before. Hargrove saw it too. Authority warred with inevitability across his face. "Keep moving," the colonel ordered, though his voice carried strain. By the time we reached the lower vault corridor, the soldier's steps had become unsteady. Dana positioned him against the wall, evaluating with professional detachment that masked urgency. "Time," she said quietly. The soldier met Hargrove's gaze. "Sir?" Hargrove did not hesitate. He raised his sidearm and delivered a single precise shot. The echo travelled down the corridor and lingered longer than it should have. No one commented. We secured the main vault sector again, activating additional magnetic seals. The fractured observation window from earlier had been reinforced with temporary plating, though the structural compromise remained evident. The pounding from above intensified as infected began striking at upper barriers. The ventilation shafts carried distorted screams and sporadic gunfire. Someone upstairs was still fighting, but the pattern was erratic. Containment was collapsing layer by layer. "Perimeter barricades are failing," Dana said after checking a partial feed still functioning near the motor pool. "They're pushing inward." The colonel stepped towards the vault door itself, resting a hand briefly against the cold steel. "This facility was designed to withstand external assault," he said almost to himself. "Not internal collapse," I replied. A heavy crash reverberated through the ceiling above us, followed by the metallic screech of something being forced along concrete. Dust filtered down in faint clouds from ventilation grates. "They've breached the administrative wing," Dana confirmed. The pounding reached the secondary corridor door again. This time it came from multiple bodies rather than one. The steel shuddered visibly with each impact, magnetic locks humming under strain. Marcus's absence pressed sharply into the moment. We were reduced in number, and the infected were multiplying. Hargrove straightened, composure returning with rigid force. "We hold this line," he declared. "If they breach here, we engage until ammunition is exhausted." The words felt less like strategy and more like defiance. Another impact struck the barrier, harder than the last. The reinforced plating along the fractured window bent slightly inward. A crack spread along the welded seam. Dana checked ammunition counts quickly. "Limited," she said. Above us, a final burst of sustained gunfire echoed, and then cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. The barricade upstairs had fallen. Now the pressure concentrated on us, deep beneath layers of concrete and stacked gold that could not defend themselves. The vault, once a symbol of impenetrable security, had become a narrowing chamber, and the infected were closing in from every level. The secondary barrier failed, with a sound that felt less like metal bending and more like something final giving way. The reinforced plating Dana had installed buckled inward under repeated impact, and the magnetic locks emitted a strained whine before cutting out entirely. The door shifted an inch, then another, until a narrow gap formed at its edge. Colonel Hargrove raised his weapon immediately, firing through the opening as the first infected hand forced its way inside. The shot landed cleanly, but momentum carried the body forward, wedging it halfway through the breach. Another set of fingers clawed over its shoulder, pushing with relentless pressure. "Fall back to primary vault door," Dana ordered. We retreated in measured steps, firing controlled shots into the narrowing corridor. Each round had to count. The confined space amplified every discharge, sound reverberating violently along concrete and steel. 2 infected collapsed before reaching us. A third stumbled forward despite a torso wound, forcing Hargrove to adjust his aim upward. The corridor filled quickly with bodies and movement. Infection had erased hesitation. Where soldiers once moved in coordinated formation, these figures advanced without regard for self-preservation. The primary vault door loomed behind us, massive and silent. Dana keyed the internal override sequence while I covered the approach. The circular steel barrier began rotating slowly into sealed position, its mechanism steady despite the chaos unfolding only yards away. "Hurry!" I said, firing again as another infected broke past fallen bodies. Hargrove stood firm until the last possible second, eliminating a final target before stepping backward through the narrowing opening. The vault door sealed fully with a heavy, resonant thud, locking us inside. Silence did not follow immediately. The infected outside continued striking the door, fists and shoulders colliding against reinforced steel with futile persistence. The sound reverberated through the chamber, deep and rhythmic, like a distant industrial pulse. We stood facing the sealed barrier, breathing unevenly. For the moment, the vault held. Rows of gold bars stretched behind us under sterile lighting, undisturbed by the violence outside. The air inside remained climate-controlled and steady, indifferent to gunfire and bloodshed. Hargrove lowered his weapon slowly. "This door can withstand direct assault," he said, though his voice carried less certainty than earlier proclamations. "For how long?" Dana asked quietly. The pounding outside continued, but slower now, as if the infected were adjusting to resistance they could not immediately overcome. We moved deeper into the vault chamber, establishing a temporary perimeter among stacks of bullion arranged in precise rows. The symbolism pressed against me more forcefully than before. Billions in stored wealth surrounded us, secured against theft, insulated from economic collapse. Yet it could not halt the infected striking inches beyond reinforced steel. The surveillance feed within the vault remained functional, but external cameras were mostly lost. Static dominated the screens. "We are isolated," Dana said. The word carried weight beyond geography. Isolation meant no reinforcement, no extraction plan, no confirmed knowledge of the outside situation. The base above might already be entirely overrun. Hargrove walked slowly between the rows of gold, fingers brushing one bar absently as if verifying its reality. "This facility was built to preserve continuity," he murmured. "Continuity of currency, of value, of national assurance." Outside the door, the impacts began spacing farther apart. Either the infected had shifted elsewhere, or they were regrouping in ways we did not yet understand. For the first time since the outbreak reached us, the immediate threat felt contained. But containment had narrowed into confinement. We were sealed inside the most secure room in the country. And for the first time, I understood that gold could anchor you in place as effectively as it represented strength. Alone with the bullion and the fading echoes of impact beyond steel, we faced a new reality. The vault was holding, but we were holding with it. The pounding against the vault door faded gradually, replaced by an uneven scraping that suggested the infected had dispersed along other corridors. The reinforced steel between us and the rest of the facility held firm, but the air inside felt heavier with each passing minute. We were secure in the most literal sense, yet the concept of security had shifted beyond recognition. Dana reviewed ammunition counts again, calculating sustainability rather than immediate defense. Hargrove stood near the door, listening as though the steel might transmit useful information. I paced slowly between the rows of bullion, trying to reconcile the absurdity of our position. We had retreated into the heart of Fort Knox, not to defend it, but to survive inside it. "We can't stay sealed indefinitely," Dana said eventually. "Air filtration will hold for a while, but food and water are limited to emergency reserves." Hargrove nodded once. "Then we establish a window for controlled movement." "Movement where?" I asked. "Upper levels are compromised. Perimeter is gone." He met my gaze evenly. "Maintenance tunnel on the east side, originally designed for controlled access during structural upgrades. It bypasses the primary compound. I remembered it. Narrow, rarely used, monitored but not heavily fortified because it was never considered a threat vector. If infected had not reached it yet, it offered a path beyond the immediate chaos. Opening the vault risks drawing them back, Dana said. Remaining risks starvation, Hargrove replied. The decision crystallized, not as heroism or duty, but as calculation. We could seal infected personnel underground permanently, creating a tomb beneath reinforced steel, or we could risk exposure by escaping through an uncertain route. Either option carried consequence beyond personal survival. I approached the vault door control panel, studying the override sequence. Once opened, the magnetic locks would require manual reset. There would be no guarantee of resealing if the system had degraded further. Once we move, I said, we don't look back. Hargrove hesitated, then gave a single nod. The asset remains secured. That will have to be enough. The phrase sounded hollow now. Secured meant little if no one remained capable of valuing it. Dana positioned herself to the left of the door, weapon ready. Hargrove took the right. I keyed the override sequence carefully, listening as internal mechanisms disengaged one by one. The circular steel door began rotating open with deliberate slowness. Silence greeted us. The corridor beyond was littered with bodies, both infected and neutralized personnel. Blood streaked along concrete in irregular patterns. No movement registered immediately. We stepped through cautiously, advancing in tight formation. The maintenance junction lay 2 corridors over. Each step felt deliberate, measured against the possibility of sudden movement from blind corners. Halfway to the junction, a low growl echoed faintly from behind a storage alcove. Dana signaled halt. A single infected figure emerged, uniform shredded, eyes fixed with mechanical intent. I fired once, dropping it before it could close distance. We continued forward. The maintenance tunnel entrance remained intact, its reinforced hatch partially concealed behind equipment racks. I keyed the access code manually. The hatch opened with a reluctant hiss, revealing a narrow passage descending into dimly lit space beyond. Hargrove looked back once toward the vault corridor. "Seal it," he said. Dana initiated the vault reclosure sequence remotely. The massive door began rotating shut behind us, sealing the infected within lower sectors permanently. As the steel met steel with a final resonant impact, I felt the weight of what we had done. Fort Knox would remain intact, its gold untouched, but the personnel who had fallen inside would never be recovered. We stepped into the maintenance tunnel without ceremony, leaving behind the most secure room in the country. This was not what we had been trained for. Training had prepared us to defend assets from external threats. It had not prepared us to abandon the symbol of permanence in order to preserve something far more fragile: ourselves. The maintenance tunnel narrowed quickly after the hatch sealed behind us. Unlike the primary corridors of the vault, this passage lacked polish and ceremonial weight. Exposed conduit lined the ceiling, and unfinished concrete walls bore marks from past structural modifications. The air smelled faintly of dust and machine oil rather than climate-controlled sterility. It felt less like a national monument and more like an exit few were ever meant to use. Dana moved first, flashlight beams steady and low. Hargrove followed, shoulders squared despite the strain visible in his posture. I brought up the rear, listening for any sign that infection had found its way into this forgotten artery of the facility. For several long seconds, only the sound of our boots against rough flooring filled the space. The tunnel angled upward gradually, intersecting with a narrow service stairwell that led toward an auxiliary perimeter fence beyond the main compound. The design had always seemed excessive during drills, another contingency layered atop already formidable security. Now it represented our only viable path away from collapsing structure. Halfway up the stairwell, A distant thud echoed from somewhere deeper within the tunnel. We froze instinctively, weapons raised. The sound did not repeat. It might have been settling concrete or a displaced object triggered by vibration from earlier breaches. In this new reality, uncertainty itself carried threat. At the top of the stairwell, Dana paused before unlocking the final reinforced door. "Once we step through," she said quietly, "there's no returning." Hargrove gave a short nod. "Fort Knox will hold." That was its purpose. I wondered what holding meant without personnel to maintain it. Gold stacked behind sealed steel could survive years undisturbed. Whether that survival mattered depended on who remained alive to measure it. Dana opened the door. Cool Kentucky air met us immediately, carrying the faint scent of grass and distant smoke. We emerged beyond the main compound fence line, several hundred yards east of the visible guard towers. From this angle, Fort Knox looked unchanged. Massive, solid, impenetrable. Nothing in its silhouette suggested internal collapse. A column of smoke rose faintly from the western edge of the compound, barely visible against the brightening sky. No gunfire reached us now. Distance softened the evidence of chaos. Hargrove stood still for a moment, studying the structure he had commanded. The rigid authority he had worn earlier seemed tempered by something quieter. "It was never about the metal," he said almost to himself. "It was about what it represented." "And what does it represent now?" Dana asked. He did not answer immediately. Beyond the outer fence, the highway stretched mostly empty, dotted with abandoned vehicles that hinted at panic spreading outward from urban centers. The infection had moved faster than containment, dissolving institutions once assumed stable. I adjusted the strap of my rifle and looked back once more at the fortified compound. Beneath layers of reinforced steel lay gold untouched by infection, sealed in darkness where it could neither defend nor betray. We had left it intact, but intact no longer meant secure in any meaningful sense. Dana began moving toward the tree line, choosing cover over open roadway. Hargrove followed, without hesitation. I fell into step beside them, aware that our roles had shifted from guardians of permanence to survivors navigating uncertainty. As we reached the edge of the forest, I allowed myself one final glance at Fort Knox. It stood, as it always had, silent and imposing, a symbol built to reassure a nation about continuity. Yet continuity now depended not on volts or bullion, but on whether any of us could outlast what had begun. The door behind us remained closed. The gold remained sealed. And for the first time in 12 years, I walked away from the vault without knowing if anyone would ever return to open it again. We moved deeper into the tree line until the compound disappeared behind dense Kentucky forest, its reinforced walls swallowed by distance and terrain. The world beyond Fort Knox felt unnervingly ordinary. Birds still calling, wind still threading through leaves, sunlight filtering across ground untouched by sirens or gunfire. Yet beneath that surface calm, something irreversible had shifted. The vault would remain sealed, its gold preserved in darkness, waiting for a nation that might not return to claim it. For years, I believed I guarded permanence. I believed that steel doors and biometric locks protected something essential to stability. But standing outside the perimeter without command, without structure, I understood that permanence had never been metal stacked behind concrete. It had been people maintaining trust in systems that no longer held. Marcus had mattered more than bullion. The soldiers who fell in the corridors mattered more than stored wealth. Survival now depended on memory, loyalty, and the willingness to move forward without assurance of restoration. Fort Knox would endure in silence. Whether we would endure outside its walls was uncertain. For the first time, I was no longer guarding gold. I was guarding the fragile possibility of continuing at all.